The sun beat down on Redemption Gulch, a harsh, unforgiving glare that baked the dust into a fine, gritty powder. I was barely 18, fresh off the trail from God knows where, my saddlebags lighter than my hopes. My name's Ethan, and all I had was a strong back, a decent aim, and a burning desire to make something of myself in this raw, untamed land. The town wasn't much. A few saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of ramshackle homes. But it was a start, and I figured I could find work on one of the ranches nearby. I'd just tied my horse, Old Rusty, to the hitching post outside the Red Dog Saloon, the scent of stale beer and cheap whiskey already assaulting my nostrils. I was thirsty, but my pockets were even drier than the dust in the street. As I stood there, taking in the scene, a commotion drew my eye. A burly man with a tarnished badge on his vest, Deputy Brandt, was yelling at an old man, frail and stooped, who was struggling to carry a crate of what looked like empty bottles. "Move it, old man. You're blocking the thoroughfare." Brandt's voice boomed, laced with impatience and a clear disdain. He was a mountain of a man, with a thick mustache and eyes that held a permanent sneer. He seemed to relish throwing his weight around. The old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, mumbled something, trying to shift the heavy crate. He stumbled, and a few bottles clattered to the ground, shattering with a sharp crack. "Clumsy old fool," Brandt roared, his face reddening. Before I could even fully register what was happening, the deputy shoved the old man hard. The old man went down, a pained gasp escaping his lips as he hit the dusty ground, scattering the remaining bottles and sending a cloud of grit into the air. His faded hat rolled away, revealing a shock of thin white hair. A hush fell over the street. Cowboys, leaning against storefronts, women carrying market baskets, everyone stopped watching. Nobody moved to help. It was clear Brandt wasn't a man to be crossed in this town. My gut tightened. My daddy always told me to mind my own business, especially in a new town. But something about the injustice of it, the raw meanness of the deputy, made my blood boil. The old man lay there groaning, his hand clutching his side. I took a breath, the dry air burning my lungs. My hand instinctively went to the worn grip of the revolver on my hip, then I forced it away. This wasn't a gunfight, not yet. This was about decency. "Hey!" My voice, surprisingly steady, cut through the silence. All eyes turned to me, a young, unknown cowboy. Brandt's gaze, cold and calculating, landed on me. "You got something to say?" "Boy," he snarled, taking a step towards me. His hand hovered over his own holster. I ignored the tremor in my voice. "You got no right to shove an old man like that. He wasn't hurting anyone." Brandt let out a low chuckle, a sound that grated like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero. You new in town, kid? You got a lot to learn about. How things work around here." He took another step, closer now, his shadow falling over me. I could smell the stale sweat and cheap tobacco on him. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I held his gaze. I'd faced angry bulls and stampedes. This brute wasn't going to scare me off. "All I know is a man helps another man when he's down," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Especially an old one." Brandt's sneer deepened. "Or what, little man? You gonna teach me a lesson?" Just then a voice, surprisingly strong and clear, cut through the tension. "That'll be enough, deputy." Everyone turned. The old man, who had been struggling to get up, was now on his feet, albeit slowly. He'd retrieved his hat and brushed the dust from his worn clothes. He didn't look at Brandt, but his eyes, sharp and surprisingly shrewd, met mine. There was a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher in them, amusement perhaps, or a flicker of gratitude. Brandt's face, which had been contorted in rage, suddenly blanched. He seemed to shrink a few inches. He stammered, "Mr. Davies, I was just—" The old man, Mr. Davies, held up a hand, cutting him off. His gaze remained, fixed on me. "Son," he said, his voice softer now, "thank you for your kindness. It's a rare commodity in these parts." Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze to Brant. His voice dropped, losing its prior softness and gaining an edge of steel that sent a shiver down my spine. "Deputy, I believe you owe this young man an apology, and perhaps a lesson in civility." Brant looked like he'd swallowed a mouthful of sand. He mumbled something inaudible, avoiding eye contact. "Speak up, Deputy," Mr. Davies prompted, his voice unwavering. Brant cleared his throat. I apologize, kid. My temper got the better of me." His words were forced, a bitter pill he clearly hated to swallow. Mr. Davies then looked at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And what's your name, young man?" "Ethan," I replied, still a bit stunned by the sudden shift in power dynamics. "Ethan," Mr. Davies repeated, a thoughtful look on his face. "Well, Ethan, perhaps you'd care to join me for a cup of coffee at the general store. I believe we have some business to discuss." I looked from the shaken deputy to the composed old man. The silence in the street was palpable. It was then, as I nodded, still trying to piece together what had just happened, that I overheard a hushed whisper from a woman near the general store. "That's Old Man Davies. He owns half the county." My jaw nearly dropped. I'd just stood up to the law for a man who, it turned out, held the reins of power in this very town. My simple act of decency had just thrown me headfirst into something far bigger than a dusty street brawl. The sun still beat down, but suddenly, Redemption Gulch felt a whole lot more complicated. The general store was a cramped but welcoming space, filled with the scent of dried herbs, leather, and freshly ground coffee. Mr. Davies, surprisingly spry for his age, led me to a small wooden table tucked away in a corner. The store owner, a kindly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, brought us 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The warmth spread through me, a welcome comfort after the unexpected confrontation. "So, Ethan," Mr. Davies began, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he sipped his coffee, "you've got a good head on your shoulders. Not many folks would have stood up to Brant, let alone for an old codger like me." I felt a blush creep up my neck. "It just didn't seem right, sir. No man deserves to be treated like that." He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Indeed, Brant's always been a hothead, and with his uncle, the sheriff, looking the other way, he thinks he's untouchable. But even a badger knows to pick his battles." He chuckled softly, then his expression grew serious. "You're looking for work, I presume?" "Yes, sir," I said, a flicker of hope stirring within me. "Anything honest. I'm a good hand with horses, can mend fences, drive cattle." Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, his gaze assessing me. "I own the Diamond R Ranch out west of town. It's a big operation. We're always looking for good, honest men. But it's hard work, Ethan. Long days, bad weather, and sometimes even worse people." My heart pounded. The Diamond R. I'd heard whispers about it on the trail, one of the biggest, most prosperous ranches in the territory. This was more than I could have dreamed of. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Davies. I came here to make my own way." "I can see that," he said, a genuine smile now gracing his lips. "Tell you what, you come out to the Diamond R tomorrow morning. We'll give you a try. If you prove yourself, there's a permanent spot for you. And," he added, his eyes twinkling, "a good wage." I couldn't help but grin. "Thank you, Mr. Davies, you won't regret it." "I don't believe I will," he replied. Then his gaze sharpened. "But let me give you a piece of advice, Ethan. Redemption Gulch might look peaceful, but there are undercurrents. Folks with old grudges, folks who want what others have. Brant is one thing, but there are others. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. His words hung in the air, a subtle warning. I sensed there was more to his advice than just general caution. The tension I'd witnessed between him and Brant, the whispered comment about him owning half the county, it all pointed to a deeper network of power and animosity. The next morning, the air was crisp and cool as I rode Old Rusty towards the Diamond R. The ranch was even more impressive than I'd imagined. Sprawling corrals, sturdy barns, and a large, well-kept bunkhouse. I was introduced to Jesse, the foreman, a weathered man with kind eyes and hands that looked like they could break rocks. He put me to work immediately, mending a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. The work was grueling, but I threw myself into it, determined to prove myself. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the rhythm of ranch life. I learned quickly, absorbing everything Jesse taught me about cattle, horses, and the land. The other cowpokes, a rough but decent bunch, slowly began to accept me. I avoided town as much as possible, especially the Red Dog Saloon, knowing Deputy Brant would likely be looking for me. One evening, after a long day in the saddle, I was sharing a quiet supper in the bunkhouse when Jesse sat down beside me. "Heard you had a run-in with Brant in town," he said, his voice low. I nodded. "He shoved Mr. Davies. I couldn't just stand by." Jesse grunted. "Good on you, kid. Most folks are too scared. Brant's a bully, and he's got too much pull from the sheriff. But Davies, he's the real power in this county. Owns most of the land, runs the bank, even got a hand in the freight lines. Brant and his uncle, the sheriff, they resent him, think they should be running things. So it's more than just Brant being a hothead?" I asked, recalling Mr. Davies's warning. "Much more," Jesse confirmed, his eyes darkening. "There's a quiet battle for control brewing in this county. Davies believes in law and order, but his kind of order is based on justice and fair dealings. The sheriff and Brant, they lean towards power and intimidation, and they're not above bending the rules to get what they want. Some folks say they've been trying to squeeze Davies out for years, chipping away at his influence." His words painted a clearer picture of the landscape I'd stumbled into. My simple act of kindness had not only secured me a job, but had also inadvertently aligned me with one side of a deep-seated conflict. The dusty calm of Redemption Gulch held a simmering tension, and I, the young cowpoke, was now unknowingly caught in its delicate balance. The nights grew colder, and the wind whispered tales of trouble, echoing Mr. Davies's unspoken warnings. Weeks turned into months. I thrived at the Diamond R, learning the intricate dance of cattle drives, the subtle language of horses, and the immense satisfaction of honest labor under an endless sky. Mr. Davies, true to his word, had given me more than a job. He'd given me a chance to build a life. He visited the ranch often, and we'd sometimes share a cup of coffee in his office, discussing everything from cattle prices to the changing weather. I found him to be a man of quiet integrity, shrewd but fair. The tension in Redemption Gulch, however, was like a slow-burning fuse. News filtered out to the ranch. Minor incidents of cattle rustling that were never properly investigated by the sheriff. Disputes over land boundaries that always seemed to favor a certain group of ranchers, connected to Brant, and an increasing number of petty crimes that went unpunished. It was a subtle but relentless chipping away at the stability Mr. Davies represented. One blustery autumn afternoon, a rider galloped into the Diamond R, his horse lathered with sweat. It was a young ranch hand from the neighboring Miller spread, his face pale with fear. "Jesse! Ethan! You gotta come quick! Rustlers hit the south pasture! They shot Old Man Miller!" My blood ran cold. Old Man Miller was a good, honest rancher, one of the few who openly supported Mr. Davies. This wasn't just rustling. This felt like a deliberate act of intimidation. Jesse immediately barked orders, and we saddled our horses, grabbing rifles. The wind howled, whipping dust into our faces, mirroring the turmoil in my gut. When we reached the Miller ranch, the scene was grim. Old man Miller lay on the ground, a bloody stain spreading on his shirt. His wife, a stoic woman, knelt beside him, her face etched with despair. The rustlers were gone, but the signs of their brutality were clear. Sheriff Thompson, Brant's uncle, finally arrived, sauntering in as if he had all the time in the world. He took a cursory look at Miller, then at the tracks. "Looks like a clear case of rustling, folks," he drawled, his voice devoid of any real concern. "Nothing we can do until they ride further out. Too many tracks to follow now." His dismissive tone ignited a fire in my chest. "They shot him, Sheriff. They shot an old man in cold blood." Sheriff Thompson's eyes narrowed, a flicker of his nephew's malice in them. "And who are you, boy, to tell me how to do my job?" "He's a good hand from the Diamond R," Jesse interjected, stepping forward. "We need justice, Sheriff. This ain't just about a few head of cattle." The sheriff merely shrugged. "Justice takes time, Jesse. You know how it is out here, wild country." He then glanced at Brant, who had arrived with him and was now leaning against a fence post, a smirk playing on his lips. It was clear they had no intention of pursuing the culprits with any real vigor. That night, back at the Diamond R, a heavy silence hung over the bunkhouse. The injustice of it all gnawed at me. Mr. Davies arrived later, his face grim. He spoke with Miller's wife, offering comfort and promising to help her. Then he pulled Jesse and me aside. "This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice low and tight with controlled anger. "They're testing us, testing my resolve, and they're doing it with impunity because the sheriff looks the other way." "What can we do, Mr. Davies?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "They're the law. They wear the badge, Ethan, but they don't uphold the law," he corrected me, his gaze firm. "We have to fight back, not with bullets, not yet, but with intelligence, with evidence. We need to find out who's behind this, truly behind it, and expose them." He looked at me, a direct, challenging look. "I need men I can trust, men who won't back down when things get tough. I need you, Ethan. I need you to ride into town, quietly, and gather information. Listen to the whispers. Watch who's meeting, with whom. Find out who benefits from this chaos." The request was a heavy one. It meant stepping directly into the viper's nest, risking everything I had gained. But looking into Mr. Davies' determined eyes, seeing the quiet grief for Miller, I knew I couldn't refuse. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the kind of place Redemption Gulch would become. The wind howled outside, carrying the dust of a town on the brink, a town where the line between law and lawlessness was blurring. And I, the young Cowpoke, was about to ride right into the heart of it. The following weeks were a blur of nervous tension and clandestine meetings. I rode into Redemption Gulch under various pretexts, usually to pick up supplies, but my true purpose was to listen and observe. The town felt different now, an undercurrent of fear palpable beneath its dusty surface. I saw Brant more often, swaggering through the streets with an even greater air of impunity. He'd eye me, a smug smirk on his face, but never engaged. He knew I was a Davies man, but perhaps underestimated my resolve. I frequented the general store, where the owner, Mrs. Peterson, often shared snippets of gossip. She was a keen observer, and her seemingly innocent remarks often held deeper meaning. I learned that a new, secretive group of gamblers had set up shop in the back of the Red Dog Saloon, often meeting late at night with Brant and even the sheriff. I overheard talk of land deals gone sour, of small ranchers being pressured to sell their properties at rock-bottom prices. The pieces slowly began to connect. One evening, I was grabbing a quiet meal at a small eatery when I saw Brant and two rough-looking men, strangers to me, in hushed conversation at a back table. Their voices were low, but fragments carried through the noisy room. "Miller's land," Next week, no witnesses. My blood ran cold. They were planning something, and it sounded like it involved Miller's now widowed property. I reported everything to Mr. Davies, who listened intently, his face etched with concern. They're trying to push her off her land, Ethan, to buy it cheap. It's an old tactic. He then revealed his plan. We can't rely on the sheriff. We'll have to gather enough evidence to take directly to the circuit judge in Silver Creek. He's an honest man, but he needs undeniable proof. Our window of opportunity came unexpectedly. Jesse received a tip from a sympathetic old prospector who sometimes worked for the sheriff's office. Brandt and his cronies were planning to confiscate a shipment of new farm equipment belonging to Mr. Davies, claiming it was stolen, and then resell it. The drop-off was scheduled for a deserted canyon pass, far from town. This was it. Direct proof of their corruption. The night of the planned ambush was cold and moonless. The wind howled through the canyon, a mournful cry that set my teeth on edge. Mr. Davies, Jesse, a few of our most trusted ranch hands, and I positioned ourselves hidden among the rocks. We were armed, but our primary goal was to observe, to document, and only intervene if absolutely necessary. The air crackled with tension, every shadow seeming to hold a lurking threat. Hours passed, stretching into an agonizing wait. Finally, we heard the clatter of hooves. Brandt and two of his men rode into the canyon, their faces obscured by the dim light of a lantern. They dismounted, and soon a wagon rolled in, driven by the prospector, who was clearly playing his part. Brandt began to bark orders, directing his men to offload the equipment. "This is it," Mr. Davies whispered, his voice grim. "Get ready, Ethan." As Brandt finished giving instructions, a small group of riders emerged from the shadows behind him. The circuit judge, accompanied by two federal marshals. Mr. Davies had planned this meticulously. He'd reached out to the judge, laid out his suspicions, and convinced him to witness the corruption firsthand. Brandt froze, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the badges. "Judge Thompson, marshals, what in blazes is this?" "It's called justice, Deputy Brandt," the judge replied, his voice resonating through the canyon. "And I believe you're about to face it." The confrontation was swift. Brandt, enraged, lunged for his gun, but the marshals were quicker. He and his men were disarmed and apprehended. The prospector, looking relieved, quietly slipped away. The stolen equipment was secured, and the dark scheme was unraveled. In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire through Redemption Gulch. Sheriff Thompson, implicated by his nephew's actions and the weight of accumulated evidence, was forced to resign. Brandt and his cronies faced charges and were taken away by the marshals. A new, honest sheriff was appointed, and slowly, painstakingly, the town began to heal. I stood beside Mr. Davies on a sunny morning, watching the first cattle of a new herd being driven onto the Diamond R. The dust still swirled, but it felt different now, no longer a symbol of stagnation, but of honest toil. Mr. Davies praises Ethan for his courage and decency, acknowledging he brought these qualities to a town that desperately needed them. Ethan, in turn, humbly states he only did what was right. Davies smiles, affirming that doing what's right is often the hardest path, but always the most rewarding. With justice restored in Redemption Gulch, Ethan realizes he's no longer just a wandering cowpoke, but a vital part of a community, ready to face his future in the West with integrity.